Good evening, everybody, and welcome here to the Ankerbrot Fabric for our event on how to bring about social change. My name is Tim Crane. I am the director of the FWF Cluster of Excellence, called Knowledge and Crisis. This is a large and ambitious collaboration between 4 universities in Austria, the universities of Vienna, Graz, Salzburg, and the Central European University. We are the lead institution. Knowledge in Crisis is an attempt by philosophers to understand and engage with a lot of the epistemological crises and problems that we find ourselves in today. Epistemology is the theory of knowledge, and we think that in order to understand so many of the problems that we have at the moment, we have to understand them from a philosophical point of view, as well as from a practical point of view. These are problems about knowledge, about society, about science, about truth, about ethics, and we are taking a holistic philosophical view among our 4 institutions to try and grapple with these problems. Our project is generously funded by the Austrian Science Fund, the FWF, and we're very proud to acknowledge their support here for all our events. Our project involves the generation of more philosophy, more philosophical activity, more discussion and penetration of ideas here in Austria, and the growth of philosophy within Austria. But we also have a commitment to knowledge transfer and communication. We believe that we ought to be able to communicate our ideas and the things that we're talking about beyond the narrow and specialized walls of the universities. And this event, which we're very happy to welcome you at today, is one of our knowledge transfer events, as we call them. It's open to everybody, and you can find more details of our other events. We run a long series of events in the coming months on our website, knowledgeandcrisis.com. First of all, I will stop talking and I will introduce our moderator for this evening, Eric Frey, who is from Der Standard newspaper. So, Eric, I'll take it to you.
Well, thank you, Tim. Somebody should do something. This is a sentence we have heard quite often when it comes to any problem, deficit, or malady in society. Well, somebody has done something. Otherwise, we would still live in the Middle Ages. We wouldn't have had any social change, any social progress over the last hundreds of years, also of the last few decades. But it's a fascinating question: how does change come about? Does it come from below? Does it people change their attitudes and beliefs? Does it come from above through political initiatives, policies, structural reforms? This is a question which comes up, which is extremely relevant for dealing with the climate crisis. What is more important, that people change their individual behavior, which I think a lot of you probably have done in the past, reduce your carbon footprint, or that the government pushes through major legislative or administrative initiatives? Should we just stop flying because of the damage to climate, or should we wait for a stiff tax on jet fuel, for which we have now waited for many, many decades? Well, Daniel Kelly is a professor for philosophy at Purdue University in Indiana, and he's the co-author of the book that gave our talk today the title, Somebody Should Do Something, and I think he will have some answers on that, and he will give us a short overview of his insights, and then we're going to get responses and have a discussion with the other 2 panelists. Cesy Leonard is a German graffiti artist, a rapper, and the co-founder of the initiative, the Verein Radikale Töchter, which was founded in 2019, and they hold workshops to encourage political participation in a playful and creative way, mostly in what you told me, mostly in the eastern part of Germany, which is probably quite a tough territory. Asya Passinsky is an American assistant professor of philosophy here at the Central European University in Vienna. She was previously at Chapel Hill, UNC, before that in Dartmouth College, before that at New York University. Asya research focuses on social metaphysics and feminist philosophy, among other things. But when I was trying to find out, okay, what can I truly, through my work, relate to, I found she did a really interesting paper on the question of how to think about cryptocurrencies, which is extremely topical these days, thanks to also the American president. Well, we were hoping to get some practical insights also from Martin Russ, who is the managing director of Austria Tech. This is an Austrian initiative that deals with changes in mobility. But he had to excuse himself. He fell ill and cannot be here with us today. So I would like to ask Danny to tell us what are the main messages in this book, which I think is not published yet. It will come out in September, but I think it can already be pre-ordered on Amazon.
Correct.
Okay, this was the short advertisement.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate it, and for the invite to come over here and talk about our not yet published book. September is when it's due. So we just recently finalized the cover, which we're quite happy about. I think it's kind of catchy. Those are my co-authors, and yeah, available for pre-order wherever you like to pre-order your things. So here's the first, sort of the shape of the overall book. We have a short introduction and a conclusion. It's broken up into 3 parts with multiple parts, multiple chapters under each part. It clocks in at under 200 pages, so this might make it look a little bit more formidable than it is. But the first part is a kind of diagnosis of what we see as something which can stand in the way of social change or thinking about social change, or the way a lot of the option space gets framed by the messaging that we get about social change. And what we call it is the problem of either-or thinking. The main frame that, this oppositional frame between either you can do personal activities or you can make consumer choices differently, or you could change the structures and sort of overthrow the systems without much conversation about how the one might connect to the other. So we give a lot of examples there and trace the roots of some of those distinctions. Part 2, we get a little bit more positive, and this is where we especially draw on some of the more theoretic work that's been happening in the cognitive and behavioral sciences in the last couple of decades, and try and replace a kind of picture of human nature which has taken root in a lot of Western conversations with a better one which really highlights the ways in which we are social animals and susceptible to social influence, but also producers of social influence. And then the last part is putting that into practice and walking through some examples of ways that it's operated in the past. So, like I mentioned, one of the main aims of the book is to try and knit together these 2 different ways of thinking about social change. On the one hand, we have the individual influences and the individual choices that people can make. And there's a whole body of discourse and way of thinking about these things, advocated in this saying by no lesser of a moral authority than the Dalai Lama. And we've all heard versions of this, that genuine change must first come from within the individual. Only then can he or she attempt to make a significant contribution to humanity. And then weave those together with the kind of calls for structural change that people like Elizabeth Warren in the United States has really been a vocal advocate for, but are the sorts of things that, at least in all 3 of myself and my 2 co-authors' journeys, there was a feeling that if you really want to get sophisticated about social change, stop talking about individual decisions and start thinking structurally. So this is often pitched as a movement to a kind of, a growing knowledge of how this stuff operates. And so to take an example that we talk about in the book, this idea of the carbon footprint, if you're concerned about climate change, one thing you can do is start keeping more track of your own personal carbon footprint. And that's very much, all right, so what different decisions can I make? Should I be stop using plastic straws? Should I buy an EV? Should I do air travel less? And one of the things we point out that the carbon footprint is a piece of propaganda which was very much pushed forward by corporate interests in an attempt to push responsibility for dealing with climate change away from mass production and the systems of corporate fossil fuel onto individuals. It's not their problem, it's our problem. And again, I mentioned that there's this sense in which a movement from maybe naivety to sophistication is coming to understand that personal choices have about as much chance of solving structural problems as a little crane did of dislodging is it the Ever Given? I had this at the tips of my fingertips. The tanker which got stuck in the Suez Canal a couple years ago. So this was a meme which was going all around, which really illustrated part of what we wanted to set ourselves against and deconstruct in this first part of the book. So you find these sorts of things very much common in the discourse around different parts of social change. These are from a couple of journalists who we very much respect, talking about what needs to be done to really address the climate crisis. But a lot of them have this shape where what they say is, look, you can't solve the climate crisis by going vegan or switching to non-plastic straws, or I don't care if you recycle, that's not gonna do it. Your personal choices are not what's needed. What's needed is something more structural. But basically what those do a lot of the time is disconnect personal choices, call for some kind of structural change without providing a whole lot of guidance on what that means or what an individual can do to help contribute to the sorts of big systemic changes that are needed. And our attempt was to, one of the aims of the book was to try and weave those two things together in a way which is a little bit more comprehensible. So one of the critical sides of the book is to, again, just put a spotlight on this, pick a side. Are you team individualist or are you team structuralist? Put a spotlight on that, show how sort of distressingly common they still are, but then deconstruct it and provide something in its place. Like I said, we point out that the oppositional framing has deep roots in a long kind of history. So here's Rebecca Solnit writing an article in The Guardian a couple years ago, pointing out that even the idea of a carbon footprint is very much a piece of corporate propaganda. I think of it as it's a piece of PR corporate dark arts, and in an attempt to shape how the conversation and how thinking about these sorts of things goes. And on the constructive side, we want to draw on state-of-the-art research from a range of different sciences. Us three are philosophers, so we're very much consumers of what happens in these sciences, and we're trying to weave them together into a kind of story which is consumable for people who aren't just academics, who aren't just philosophers, who aren't just the scientists themselves, and develop an alternative to that either-or thinking, which is a little bit more symbiotic, which is both and. What do we need? We need both individual changes and structural changes, but the kind of individual changes which are going to be most potent are the ones which help us collectivize and which help us join together to change those structures. So one of the main images we have in the book to illustrate this kind of both and perspective that we're advocating for is the classic duck rabbit. And basically we just think that debates about what's most fundamental or what needs to happen first in order for social change to really take off. Should we be doing structural change first or individual change first, or what's the most primary level? Those are just bad questions. They're just confused. They're of the same order of, is that really a duck or is it really a rabbit? Well, it's both, and if you focus on one set of features, then the other ones kind of fall into the background. But if you focus on another set of features, then the opposite set fall into the background. But on a base level, they're all, in fact, interconnected, and that's just one image. It's static, social change is dynamic, but it's a nice place to start. So again, the book assembles ideas and stories that try and illustrate ways and show how social structures shape individual agency, and then individuals can take steps which change the social structures that they inhabit, which will then feed back and change the range of options that individuals have when they're making their personal choices, and that kind of feedback loop. And no one ever really claims that these are distinct, individual versus structural, but no one really does the work of weaving them together, or at least that was our diagnosis, and that's where we thought we would write a book and try and do a little bit more of that positive work. So one of my favorite quotes from Iris Murdoch, this is moving into the second more positive part of the book where we're trying to construct a better image of what people are and how they relate to each other and what kind of powers they have for social change. Iris Murdoch has a quote that says, "Man is the creature who makes pictures of himself and then comes to resemble the picture," which I think is sort of deceptively deep. And so what we do in that second part of the book is call attention to one very individualist picture of humans common in Western cultures and their minds and how they're related to each other, and develop an alternative which has, like I said, roots in the contemporary cognitive sciences, which just seem to be finding one way after another of the ways in which what's really special about humans as a species is how incredibly social we are, how incredibly interconnected we are, how much our minds actually evolved to be able to build culture and inhabit these kind of social structures, but also change them. And then show how this picture contains good news about our potential to create and guide social change. So we are all, one of our claims is, we're already all agents of change. We're actually spraying social influence with everything that we do, whether or not we sort of realize that we're doing that. And so what we try to do there is get a little bit clearer on this, say a little bit more specific things about the elements of that, so that we can harness that ability, so that we can be better and more effective agents of social change, and show how the social water, how social influence is kind of the water that we swim through, that we may not always realize that it's there, but both that water and the character and the sophistication of our minds, if we understand them better, should enable us to swim through that water and move it around in ways that we wouldn't be able to do if it goes on being unnoticed and underappreciated. And then just the last slide I'll have here is thinking about the book as a whole after having, we sent off the drafts of this a while ago, and then having a little distance from it and thinking about what it is, it sort of occupies a weird space, I thought, in rereading it for this, that it's not really, all three of us are philosophers, we're academics, we teach classes and write papers, so it's not an activist's how-to manual. We're not activists, someone else would have the know-how to write that book. It's not a recipe for political revolution. We have a lot to say about incrementalism and how we should think about that. We're not policy, we don't write for the Brookings Institute or anything like that. It's not a list of very specific policy recommendations. And academics like to ask us if this is our theory of change, and it has a capital T and a capital C when they say it. Is this in competition with a Hegelian picture of how the world's spirit is going to unfold over the course of time? Very much not. It doesn't have any grand aspirations of that, but instead it's more of an attempt to break up old patterns of thinking and entrenched ways of approaching these issues, and maybe expand our moral imaginations and how we can think about them. And so it's kind of a compendium of better tools for thinking. We are philosophers, so that's the coin of the realm, that's what we deal in. Better tools for thinking about social change and our own places in creating that social change and then shepherding it as it goes forward.
Well, thank you, Dan. The one question which comes to my mind is, because maybe I'm a typical question from a political scientist, and which you are not, how important is electoral politics as a conveyor belt from individual attitudes to structural change? This is something which the book doesn't touch on it a lot, it seems.
Right. So, like you said, we're not political scientists, but we do talk about voting, and we talk about the kind of identity people might have when they're voting, and what kind of motivation people who vote might have, knowing full well that their one individual vote is very much unlikely to change the outcome of especially federal elections. But that said, there are other ways to affect change that aren't necessarily at the ballot box. And part of what we think is important there is, seeding the ground and changing attitudes in such a way that once something gets enough of a sort of a groundswell of support behind it, then that can be harnessed, and maybe then the politicians can do something about it, or maybe then the political scientists will have a little bit more to say about how it can be operationalized through the formal apparatus of a state government, right?
Well, another way how to affect change is, Cesy, what you are doing in your work. You're working really with grassroots initiatives, trying to make people get involved in change. Also working with, as you told me, sometimes students who are quite randomly don't know what to expect, and others who have been involved in social change all their professional lives. And a lot of them must be quite frustrated with having put so much energy in trying to achieve their goals, and then having the feeling so little has changed and so little has been achieved. How do you keep up hope, and how do you keep up optimism for those for whom it never move fast enough?
That's a good question, and I think how to keep up hope is one of the questions in the moment, especially like when it comes even to voting, voting and believing that I can make a difference and that it's important to go and vote. But yeah, we work with artistic strategies especially. Why do we do that? Because we believe that to create social change, and to also create social change in a way that really interests people and gets people mobilized and on the streets and involved, works very well with telling stories about the future you could imagine if you want to get involved in something that really matters to you. For example, we worked with a group in Görlitz. It's also in a rural area in the east of Germany. And the people felt very hopeless because the right-wing party is very, very strong there. And they knew if we go out and vote, nothing will change. And still creating this group and creating a workshop there and getting together and giving them artistic strategies to maybe go out and create a poster or an underground action. That's what they then started to do. And it's very much about coming together in groups, believing in a goal together that they could maybe perhaps create change, and then to become active together. And sometimes it works and you can actually change and get more votes in the direction against the right wing, for example. But often it doesn't work, but still the feeling of gathering, coming together, being a group, working on the same topic, this already creates a feeling of hope and a feeling of worthiness.
So it's more about personal change, about feeling better about yourself than about actually affecting something in society?
I'm not sure. I don't know why Greta Thunberg, for example, started sitting in front of the parliament, the Rathaus in Stockholm. But what I know is that she didn't know what she is about to create. What a huge movement, worldwide movement. So this is, I think, very important if we want to inspire people to start taking action, that you can't only start to take action and then see the end and say, oh, I'm only going to start and sit here if I then create a global movement. No, you have to do it for yourself. You have to do it because you feel this is right. And I think this is very much for Greta, for example, just one big example, the thing why she sat there, because she said, no, I can't take this anymore. And you see this a lot also in the Widerstandsbewegung in Nazi Germany, of course, like people just handing out flyers and so on and so forth, and they knew they can't do anything against this dictatorous regime, fascist regime, but still they did it because they thought this is right. So I think it has a lot to do with a personal feeling.
And sometimes you happen to be Greta Thunberg and start a global movement. Now, just one more question is, do you have these people in the workshops? Do you sometimes come back to them a while later and see what the impact of your work has been their own activities?
We very much try to create a whole system of change, you could call it, in the way that we not only go in with a workshop, but then afterwards we have evaluation talks, like we ask people half a year later, in what way did the workshop impact you, for example, or that we give them like the possibility to participate in further projects of ours, or we connect them with other people. So this is a very, very important part of our work.
It's also important for you to see what impact you can have, or not only what impact they can have, but also what your work does. Asya, of course, you're a philosopher. You are dealing with rather abstract issues, but also you're dealing with feminism, which is quite relevant in the lives not only of half of our population, but of everyone, I would argue. From your point of view, I mean, what do you think? What are the main factors driving social change? I mean, we saw attitudes to women have changed a lot over the last century, decades. We've seen one of the really surprising developments in the last decade or 2 decades was the social attitude, public attitude toward homosexuality, same-sex marriage, which suddenly became acceptable. But now when it came to transgender groups, there was a backlash. Somehow what people thought should also work the same way did not have the same result. What are the factors that lead to where changes is achieved, and or where it stumbles or stalls?
Yeah, that's a great and very difficult question.
Yes.
So I think in general, I very much agree with Dan that we both need changes in individual attitudes and beliefs, and also change at the structural level to have social change. And I also think there's an important kind of intermediary level, which is that of collective beliefs and attitudes. So that's more than just the individual. So that's the case when, say, we both believe something as part of a whole group believing it. Say, we as Americans believe this, or we as members of this church believe this. And I think that's also a really important factor in social change, kind of getting people to collectively believe something new together. And I think that in the case of, say, gay rights, there was a massive change in individual attitudes, and also in these collective beliefs, also in communities like church communities and other organized groups, where all of a sudden all the members of that group or community kind of changed their attitudes. Why? I mean, I think one really important factor was that many LGBTQ people came out and started telling their stories to people, and people became informed about this. And I think now, everyone knows somebody who is LGBTQ, and people kind of have the information about this. And I think that really kind of made this kind of revolution possible. In the case of trans people, I think that there's been an enormous amount of misinformation, and I think that's been a huge problem. So Trump, for example, recently said, well, there's just 2 genders, female and male, and this is a matter of biology, this is science. Now, that's just false. So people who study this within biology will tell you that, we classify people as female and male on the basis of numerous factors, including chromosomes and hormone levels and bodily anatomy, and those don't always align for people. And so it's just not true that these are the facts of biology, that there's just females and males. And I think that sort of misinformation has been kind of crucial in the attitude towards trans people. I think also there's been a huge amount of fear-mongering. If we let, say, trans women use women's restrooms, then there will be all this violence against cis women. And I think, again, that is not grounded in any evidence, that, in fact, if you look at the data, trans women are among one of the most vulnerable groups. They're extremely vulnerable to violence. So I think this combination of misinformation and fear-mongering has been behind, I think, a lot of the attitudes towards trans women.
And maybe the stories haven't been told sufficiently enough to
Exactly. So I think part of
Make
it is
to
just
make
that
people touch.
there are more LGBTQ
Yeah.
people than trans people, and this is a much more recent thing of trans people coming out and starting to tell their stories. And many people don't know a single person who's trans and have never heard the story of a person from them, and they've only heard it from other people who never tell the story the way that a person would.
Dan, can you give a few examples from the United States where social change has really happened, either from below or from above?
Yeah, we have a lot of different stories in the book, but one of the ones that didn't make it into the book was just the story of gay rights. I mean,
Yeah.
so that's happened in the last, several decades, and there was a concerted effort, which we just heard a little bit about. There was also very much intentional stories, which was made public. So a lot of people who think about this think about the popularity of like Will and Grace, this TV show, which kind of normalized gay people, and so there's a sense in which that was one of these places where attitudes shifted, and then finally the formal institutions kind of caught up with the attitude shifts. So that's an example of social change which worked and which sort of happened slowly, but then had a culmination anyway. Social change can happen in the other direction, and whether or not we're going to see a regression on that in the next couple of years is still up for grabs. But we very self-consciously wrote the book about social change and not about moral progress, so we could talk about instances in both cases. And so one of the cases that we look at with a sort of more of a microscope is the success of the NRA and how their playbook has been so successful in getting policy passed, and the way that they actually used a lot of the same moves that the temperance movement used in the United States when they were so successful in their movement for social change that they passed a constitutional amendment. And then the backlash to that was the amendment got repealed. But so the NRA has been very successful, and part of the way they do that is they build a sense of community, like very self-consciously. They introduce ways to think about what community membership looks like. They've turned the members of that community into single-issue voters, and they've built relationships with policymakers. And so they've been successful in a way that my co-authors and I don't see as progress, but it's been a very successful instance of change. And so you wonder if people with other political ends and who think progress is in another direction, like, what can we learn from that?
I find this quite paradoxical, the question of gun control in the United States, because opinion polls show there's an absolute majority in favor of much stricter gun control, and every few weeks there is an event which you would think should focus people's mind on it. I mean, school children being killed. What can be more emotionally mobilizing than these tragedies in these mass shootings? And still, on the policy level, the United States has gone the other way, the other direction. How can this be explained?
It's a question more for political scientists than myself, but we talk about it a little bit. I think it's shameful that this state of affairs just keeps lasting, and especially in the face of sort of general public opinion. But again, the way that this particular group has built an identity and then built a community around that identity, and a lot of those, I think I mentioned this, a lot of them are single-issue voters, right? So if there's a politician who is pro-gun control, then that's a deal breaker. Like, that's the single and the one most important thing. Whereas most of the people who would like to see more reasonable gun control, that's not their one single issue that they're voting on. They also care about all these other issues, climate change and the economy and everything else. So the asymmetry and the significance of that one issue, but it's been very much socially constructed. And it's something that, again, maybe there's things in that playbook that other groups could use, and we kind of make that argument in one of our chapters.
Yes. Well, Cesy, I mean, when we talk about climate issues, there is, for most people, it's probably as those who want gun control, it's rather one issue among many. there is a group for which it's like the foremost the only issue. Some of them have become activists in movements like Last Generation or Extinction Rebellion, which really feel like they have to go out and make very provocative, rather provocative activities to change people's attitudes. Which there is a feeling that this may have also backfired and has rather hurt the cause. Now, when you compare like different approaches of how do you go about, for example, fighting global warming, there's this very radical approach. Then you have the Fridays for Future, which is like trying to have mass mobilization. And then you have those who just basically say, okay, why don't we just vote for the Greens, or maybe even the SPD. This will be enough. What can be the most effective way to achieve what if you care about the issue?
Well, I think that we need all these different approaches. And they are very important, first of all, because society is diverse, and if you want to address a lot of people and create a mass movement, you want to get the young people going on the streets, and you want to have your grandma come with you, then you need a movement that you find in a lot of different fields. So when the kids are on the street demonstrating, then you need the political party who tries to have these issues and put them through the parliament and into law. So I guess it's these discussions around what is better and what is not working so much. I find them really difficult because, as I'm making the point, we need all these different parts and views, and especially with the extremist way of addressing, especially climate change. And if it was a backlash, I think it's interesting because it's been a very big media storytelling, especially in Germany, about the framing of what is effective and what is not. Because as we were talking before, we said if something is really effective or not, you can only maybe see in 10, 20, 30, maybe 50 years looking back onto our time now. But we had like a total media bashing in Germany, and I think also here in Austria, about these more radical movements towards climate change. And I think it's really interesting, especially also on the gay rights movement, that it's so important how does media and how is the general storytelling around an issue, like is it found in pop culture, for example? Do you have I don't know, pop stars going on demonstrations as well? Like, have you got these iconic figures telling stories of a political movement, for example? So you need these, you need the arts to help create a social change, to put it into like a more broader spectrum, I'd say. And it very much depends on the media coverage on something.
Well, activists, they also try to get media attention. Yes. This is the main purpose also of their many times of their activities, and then they're sometimes surprised that the media reaction is not what they expected, what they were hoping for. Is this something you're also dealing with the people you're working with? How to steer things in a way which perhaps to make people like me in journalism do what you want rather than write the wrong stories about it?
Well, I think having attention on the pressing issues of our time is extremely important. Yeah. Greenpeace, for example, knew this very early on. Like Greenpeace was with their little fisher boat somewhere in the ocean far away in the 70s, fighting whale extinction. And the only way they had people giving money for their issues was through these images of this little boat fighting against the tankers. So creating these images and creating, how do you say, like media attention is very important, of course.
But maybe sometimes you cannot predict as well as people think. Like also, as you said, Greta Thunberg didn't expect.
No,
what,
I don't
what
think
comes
she
out
did
of it.
expect.
No, but also on media the shaping the story is the more difficult than what some NGOs, for example, believe, that if they put out the right press release, then the coverage the narrative will be what they want.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's also a question of power. So if you study as you did in your book, of course, but how do what makes social change more effective than others? Then it's often that you have maybe a figure who has very good contacts and has especially if you do petitions on social media and you have 200 million people following you, then this will be a very, very effective way to get your clicks towards a certain issue, whereas other issues that don't have so much lobby won't. Yeah.
Asya, do you have any thoughts? One issue which is also extremely relevant for all, whether it's the United States or Europe, is migration. Do you want to have a society which is open to people either who are just coming here to work or who need protection, or whether you see them as a threat? And this has really been something which has been very much shaped by also political forces trying to make people believe in one or the other direction. What can you expect? How can this work? Is there a way also to break the kind of narrative, which of course in the most extreme form is now put forward by the White House in the United States, but also by plenty of far-right parties and also many conservative politicians here in Europe?
Right. I think again, misinformation is one problem, but I think that another problem is that oftentimes the people who then get sucked into these narratives are ones whose kind of lives are not going so well, right? Because they're having economic difficulties, or they don't have, a good job anymore, or something else is not going well for them. And so I think one thing that draws people to these kinds of kind of false narratives is a sense that things are not going well for them. And so making sure that their economic situation is not very bad could be one thing that's important.
Yes, which is one explanation that you often hear, but that you need better social policies to change that. What has been from your point of view, on the issue of migration? What has been the shaping forces that would also lead to, then in the end, also to different policies?
It's a really interesting issue, and I don't have any specific expertise on this one, but just trying to sort of bring the perspective to bear on that. I agree that there's probably some sort of frustration and anger which is being harnessed by this particular set of stories, which can cast one group as the villains who are doing bad things, and that's in some ways understandable, but I also think it's maybe an opportunity for something else if you could change the narrative. So part of what was behind the impetus to write this book was think more systematically about what can be done productively with feelings of frustration and with feelings of bordering on despair, and how those can be sort of harnessed and put into better directions. I agree that in this case, maybe especially misinformation is going to be another culprit, and how easily the anger and frustration can get pointed in non-productive directions. But that's nothing specific to this story, because I think misinformation is just a huge problem that we don't know how to handle yet. I mean, social media is 20 years old, and we were going to have a third main theme in this book, which was on misinformation and disinformation, and it was just intractable as far as we can tell. So I think that's really a hot spot for thinking more systematically, and for people doing more research, and then packaging it in ways that are going to be consumable by people like us who are interested in social change. But one of the reasons it's so important is, again, to connect it back to some of the themes of the book, is humans are just, our minds are exquisitely sensitive to social influence. And part of what social media has done is it's just taken that, and now, there's whoever's running the algorithm has just extreme control over the sort of information that different people see down to a personalized level. And what we see a lot, we tend to think is normal, and then that shapes how we think about a whole host of issues. And so what becomes normalized and how that plugs into our norm psychology is something, in the case of migration, where it's both identity and what's normal, and there's these issues of frustration and anger, it just makes it kind of a perfect storm of things going wrong in exactly this sense.
Asya, is social media changing the way people learn about issues, people think about issues? Is it just a different way of just getting information, or maybe misinformation? Or is there something more profound about the way social media is changing people's minds?
I mean, I think that one effect of it is that people are communicating much less with others who don't share their opinion already. And so there are far more bubbles now.
Okay.
And so I think there's a lot less opportunity to actually get information, because if you're on social media and you're getting feeds from people who already have all of your views, then you won't actually be exposed to other people who might challenge your views or actually share some new information with you. And so I think it's becoming a very big problem, where we're not being able to kind of have dialogues and discussions with people who kind of don't already have the same views that we have.
Okay, and so you just reinforces the views, and you don't question them, because there's no counter argument,
right,
that you encounter. Cesy, do you feel social media, can it be helpful to what extent? How can it be helpful for the causes of the people you're working with, or to what extent is it harmful, as today?
So we started out working a lot with young adults, and if you work with young adults, then of course you have to work with social media, because this is a space where we all, but especially young adults, spend a lot of time and have their social contacts and their friends. So we as an organization, first of all, are on social media. We are on Instagram, do a lot of work through Instagram as well, also a lot of community work, but also information work, also humorous and fun work towards political, the political in a wider sense, so issues that could be, that you would want to change or work on, which is really important, because I think if democracy, for example, stays so abstract, or also like climate change is something really abstract, I need to have it like in a very concrete way for myself as a young person to want to participate in it, and especially to see, you make this point in your book as well, to like feel like I am part of this big system, and not it's me and there's a big system over there. So it has to be like edible, it has to be fun. We say democracy has to become sexy again. So we do that, of course, also through social media. And I think also the uprising in Germany, there's been a lot of studies about this, has become also so big because of these bubbles, especially on TikTok, and right-wing parties and right-wing thinkers taking in a lot of space in these rooms that people spend time.
Yes.
So of course we have to look there.
Dan, you made an interesting point in your short presentation about how this idea of the global footprint, for example, as a narrative was really pushed by corporate interests. Also, your book starts with the example of the automobile industry, I think back in the 1920s, inventing this term jaywalkers to make clear that you as a pedestrian are responsible if you get hit by a car and injured, and not the industry. How easy is it for powerful, mostly corporate interests, other interests, to manipulate public attitudes given their resources and their abilities, today also through social media probably, and what can be done against it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and part of what we thought we could do against it, given the social roles that we occupy, was write a book. Part of what one of the positive messages is, if we're trying to see what our role is in big systemic change, telling stories where we can see role models, but also just becoming a little bit more aware of the social structures that we occupy and the roles that we already inhabit, and figuring out how to leverage what we can do from those social roles. So I'm not personally an activist. I'm not a policy wonk, but I'm a philosophy professor. So we've written a book that's leveraging our skills and trying to get a particular message out to raise awareness about stuff like the idea of a carbon footprint is a piece of corporate propaganda with an aim behind it, and the aim is not. It's the corporate fossil fuel industry's aim, not ours. I've designed and taught classes. Another way that I've how can I leverage my skill set and my role in the world, where I teach students about this sort of thing, and the way that advertising and even the words of our language. But like you pointed out, one of our opening examples was the very word jaywalker was introduced by a lobbying agency that was trying to put the responsibility for not getting killed by cars on the pedestrians who were getting killed by cars. And that they also tried to introduce a corresponding word that would put the responsibility on the drivers of those cars, and that word is flivverboob, which did not catch on the way that Jaywalker did, but the exact same sort of Machiavellian ideation was behind it. And just like talking about this stuff with other people and raising awareness and putting them a little bit more in a skeptical mindset, I think is that I have the skills to do that. I don't know if I have the skills to change the system. But.
From now on, I will feel guilty every time I use the term carbon footprint in my paper. Right. But of course, it is useful. So it's at least, one has to probably balance it with the awareness that the carbon footprint is caused not only by individual choices. Yeah, I would like to give you a chance to ask questions. There is, we have two microphones at least, so please wait for the microphone, and I will ask you to introduce yourself very shortly, and then keep short and ask a question, and not give a long statement, because this is really, this shows a lack of solidarity. And we can start here in the second row. Oh, right here.
Thank you for a thought-provoking presentation. My name is Andre Goodfriend. I was retired from the U.S. State Department. So I'm looking at the premise that we need to try to find a hybrid between individual action and institutional change. And looking also at your roles as professors of philosophy at universities, and also as a practitioner, let's say, of applied humanities. What's the role of the university in trying to encourage students to take their philosophy studies, their humanities studies, and apply it for institutional change? Humanities has been dropping. Humanities studies have been dropping. Are you seeing a resurgence? Are your universities doing anything to help change the framework through which your students view the world so that they can take institutional change?
That's a very interesting question. I think we have two philosophy professors here who can respond to that. Dan, you want to start? Oh, wait.
Yeah, so the university I'm at is Purdue University. It's primarily an engineering and agriculture school with a very pragmatic mission. So you get a lot of people moving through there who are going to be going out and building things and then being in charge of firms that build things. And some of the largest classes, some of the largest enrollments we have are classes which are engineering and ethics. It's sort of data ethics. Some of those are full of people who aren't necessarily happy to be there. They're there to check off a requirement. but the requirements are there, and I think the people that are teaching those classes are getting better at kind of connecting with their students, and so everyone is aware that this is something which needs to keep happening and keep evolving. So that's sort of on a pedagogical level. Your question could be interpreted as like, what can the university itself do to mobilize whatever forces are happening there? I mean, I think universities can make commitments to be carbon neutral 10 years out. Like, you know, I'm part of a movement at Purdue, which is really pressing the administration there to like vindicate a plan. Like, how are you going to go carbon neutral? And in that way, that you can be a leader in that space. And yeah, I mean, on a more, I guess, a bigger level, would just, you know, make sure that the messaging is there for the students who want to hear it. So I mentioned before, there's a lot of students in some of these classes who are there just because they need to check a box. But there's also a lot of them there who have a social conscience and are interested to hear more about what the right thing to do with it is. And a lot of my colleagues across the humanities are talking to each other about how to do this. So there's courses on climate ethics in the philosophy department and the psychology department. There's someone in our English department who teaches a class on climate fiction. So it's all about storytelling and the role that can be involved. But we're having a lot of these conversations. Are we thereby saving the humanities? Not with that, but I will say that the philosophy department at Purdue has doubled in size in the last 4 years because of an administrative innovation, which is actually routing a lot more people through the College of Liberal Arts where the humanities are taught. So everyone's aware that these are worries and are.
Although the main focus of Purdue University is not the humanities.
It's not the humanities
exactly,
at all, but the college itself is growing because it's sort of it has looked squarely in the eye the crisis in the humanities, and is taking steps to find new models which will push back on it and draw kids back into it.
Okay. Asya, do you have any?
Yeah. So I guess I don't really see my role as kind of encouraging to my students to become activists, but rather I see it as kind of teaching in a passionate way the subjects that I know, and I think for those students who kind of then want to go and do something with that, they can. So when I was at Dartmouth, for example, I taught a course on philosophy and economics, and some of the topics that we covered were equality and, you know, what is an equal society? Should we have an equal society? If we want to, what sort of equality should we strive towards? And we read a lot of classic authors, including Marx, and also contemporary authors. And many of the students in my course came from very wealthy families. Many of them were fraternity boys. And they were just taking that class because, you know, they had to check it off as a requirement, but they were actually really gripped by these texts and these authors and these ideas. And I think that for some of them, it was the first time that they really kind of reflected on some of these questions. And I guess my hope is just that by kind of having a professor who was passionate about teaching these things and tried to do it in an engaging way, it maybe sparked some ideas or some reflection in them that could maybe go on to make a difference in how, you know, what they do with their lives or how they do it. But I don't really see the role of the university as kind of actively encouraging students to become activists.
Okay. Yeah, please.
Hello.
Oh, there.
I think I got the microphone. Yes, my name is Jacob, traveling musician. I was very fascinated by what you talked about with the NRA and their success in affecting social change, and also the role of misinformation on the right wing. And my question is then, if I, as a lefty, as an environmentalist, want to use the same strategies to affect change, how would I go about it? Like, how can the left and the environmental movement use the strategies of the NRA to, because it seems effective. And at this point, I think efficiency is more important than anything else, really. Yes, that's my question.
Good. So I don't think you should use misinformation. So let's just take that one off the table. Maybe be more strategic in the way messaging happens. Get savvy about the way information moves these days and how especially the younger generation consumes it and what they find authentic or inauthentic and what they're willing to buy into and what isn't. That's not misinformation. That's just sort of updating with the world that we live in now. Right, so increasingly mainstream media is not, that's not where a lot of young kids get their information, and it's from these podcasts and it's from TikTok, and so those seem like the channels to be pumping out messages which are true and pointing them in the right direction. The NRA question is fraught. So my co-authors and I have we've stood behind this idea that there's a playbook there which has been successful, and maybe lefties could learn from it. And a lot of hardcore lefties just push back and don't even want to touch it. It's tainted, or it's been used for evil purposes, and we shouldn't do whatever they do. I don't think that's right. I think part of, if you understand what happens there at an abstract level, prescinding away from the ends to which it has been put, I think the way that, like I said before, and this is something which connects individuals to communities, this sort of maybe intermediate layer, to the policy apparatus where things can actually happen, was very self-consciously, there was publications, there was membership cards, attached to those membership cards were benefits. So it was a very self-consciously created community. It wasn't all located in one geographical area. So it was one of these things where it was a community that was dispersed, a sort of an imagined community, as it were. And then the minds behind it also gave a language to people that they could use to think about gun rights and a whole bunch of other things. We have a chapter about this in the book. And then relationships were built between that community and policymakers. And so I think that step of build an identity, get people together, give them benefits which come with being a member of the community, and then connect that up very specifically with politicians. I think that's a playbook which is content neutral and should be deployable in ways which can be used for good.
Can it be copied?
I guess, so I understand the skepticism that maybe there's some things that are going to work for right-wing rather than left-wing. There's tons of research these days on differences in political psychology. So I'm sensitive to the idea that some things may just work better on the right rather than on the left. I don't see this as being one of them. I haven't heard a convincing argument that there's something in the kind of thing I just laid out that is not going to work for a more progressive cause. Okay. I could be wrong, but again.
And it's so interesting that on some topics they are so in your face that they should really work. For example, in Germany you have this huge topic around taxes, and then on the one hand you have major corporate firms that don't pay any taxes, or even tax fraud systems where taxes are pulled out of the system through cum-ex. Yes. I don't know if you heard about it. And on the other hand, you have this whole story about the unemployed that don't go working enough, and they cost the taxpayer much less money. So it could be really interesting to create a social change around this way of thinking and kind of demonize the real demons in a different way, but somehow that has never worked so well. And I think it's often because it's where the money is. I would be interested in the examples that you put also with the car industry or NRA. It's two major corporate firms that want to make money. So, and it doesn't work so well with a system change that is not for the money. Or maybe you can have you got other examples that work without money? It's difficult, yeah.
Agree, it's difficult. I mean, you would think at some point there's going to be enough capital interested in the propagation of much more friendly fuel infrastructure. At some point, the money's going to be there. Yeah. But there's still a ton of money in the fossil fuel industry, and they're all more entrenched, and the relationships with politicians are they're more built up, and there's more of a history there. So those industries are inevitably going to sunset, but are they going to do it fast enough for us not to light ourselves on fire as a planet? That's the race that we're in right now. But
I don't want to be hopeless with this. No, definitely not.
But that's an important point. That I think that just want to add something. That new movements have a disadvantage because they're new and they don't have the traditions and the long-standing contacts and the entrenchment.
I mean, another instance of social change that did make it all the way up to the governmental and the federal level in the United States is the IRA legislation that passed. And that was renamed as the Inflation Reduction Act, but that was the single biggest piece of pro-climate action legislation that's ever been passed. Yeah. And a lot of that money was to like seed innovation for new things, and to also create a kind of like prestige and status around pursuing those particular career paths. I mean, in a lot of ways, it was a pretty keenly, like shrewdly designed piece of legislation.
Yes.
I have one more good example just to put some hope into this, the tobacco industry around smoking. Yes. This is definitely a good example how a system change worked, banning smoking. And if you look back in the 70s, like doctors were saying that smoking is healthy and smoking in doctors' offices and so on and so forth. And even in Germany, where heavy smoking in all the Bierzelte was going on, where you could, it was banned and it was accepted through
society. Another example of very rapid change, actually, surprisingly fast compared, please, there's a question here. It's working, I think.
Yeah. Hello, testing, thank you for your insights. So we covered a lot about misinformation and, sorry if I mispronounce your name, Cesy?
Cesy,
Okay. About, posting photos, but now with the digitalized world, a lot of fake things are happening with misinformation and disinformation. So although we don't want to be Debbie Downers, but be realistic, the younger generation are a little bit hopeless into their voice, what matters. So do universities have like a framework or a curriculum that prepare the analytical thinking of the younger generation, how to prepare themselves like for the digitalized world?
To deal with misinformation, disinformation, and to learn
how one thinks, what's happening in the Middle East, you see a lot of fake news. AI is, happening around. So how does education, like now, really help the younger generation to really have more analytical thinking and et cetera for the future?
Who would like something to say? Asya, would you like to start?
Sure. Yeah. So at CU, we teach a critical reasoning course. And I think one of the aims of this course is precisely to try to give students the tools to think critically and clearly about what they see and to be able to spot things that might be misinformation or that are not logical or that contain some sort of logical fallacies. And this is a course that all of our BA students in philosophy, politics, economics take in their very first year. And I think something like that is very helpful and actually should be taught much earlier than university. Mm-hmm. So I think that courses of this sort of type should be taught right now, as early as elementary or junior high school, because I think you're right that this is a very, very big problem, and I think it's starting earlier and earlier because kids are on social media, now. I mean, I'm a mother with a 1.5-year-old, and I see like 2-year-olds on phones and on screens, and the kids are growing up on social media, and so I think starting with these sorts of courses earlier could be a really important thing to do.
When I'm dealing with information where I'm not sure whether it's right or not, I usually just try to apply plausibility. Basically, I'm trying to think logically. Is teaching logic something that can help?
I think definitely.
Okay.
So, I mean, this critical reasoning course is effectively a course in informal logic.
Yes.
I think teaching formal logic is also helpful. Yeah. So that's also a course that we teach and that I've taught. I think everyone should be taking a course in at least informal logic, and if they're up for it, also formal logic.
Okay.
I endorse all of that, but also I think increasingly, and the people that I know who teach these critical reasoning courses, they have been evolving. And so it's not just, here's the naturalistic fallacy or here's like a misconstrued logical inference. More and more they're incorporating something like that I would call a kind of media literacy, right? So how to sort out trustworthy sources is, I think, a huge part of developing the kind of critical reasoning skills that modern people need now. So yeah, issues of trust and kind of the social side of critical reasoning. And so people are adding things to the toolkit of critical reasoning classes. One of my favorite one of these is a paper which was arguing that critical ignoring is actually something that we all need to teach more explicitly, like what to ignore. That's a big part of epistemic hygiene, as the technical way of saying it. But I think there's the last thing I'll say about this is there's a sense in which I have hope about this for the generations coming up behind us. I remember when I was growing up. This is a cliche, but I would have to be the one who would program the clock on the VCR for my parents because they didn't understand the new technology, right? I'm now my parents when it comes to social media, but the kids are savvy, and there's a sense in which they're digital natives, and they've grown up in this world, and I think they're also building up the kind of skepticism and a kind of critical reasoning skills that hasn't made it into textbooks yet, but they're all kind of teaching each other, because this is the jungle that they grew up in, and that I have hope that that'll help. They won't be as bewildered as the boomers were by the first wave of Facebook misinformation, right? That was all new to them.
I would definitely say that's right, because I have a 13-year-old, and just what they watch on social media also, they are very critical. Yeah. I wouldn't maybe not say about everybody, but they definitely grow up with a very critical thinking. But what I thought, a colleague of mine was in the US now, and she said what is so shocking to her is that you have these Fox Media and CNN, and the same issue is talked about as if it's two different realities. And this is something we don't have, I'd say, in the whole of Europe yet. Especially in our state media, you would talk about one issue, and then maybe the newspapers have different. It's not as if they were talking about a completely different reality. And that's what she stated in the US. You have the thing that it's as if it's a different reality you're talking about. And that's where it starts to become very dangerous then, because then it's not about misinformation, and that way it's as if there are different realities you're talking about. Maybe you can say something on that.
Yeah, I mean, how to solve that, I think that's something structural that would need to happen. Again, I have a little bit of faith that the upcoming generations will hopefully be more savvy about this sort of thing. So I was talking about social media and the information diet that people get on social media. This is something much more, this is like corporate media, CNN versus Fox versus MSNBC or something. I just don't know if that's going to be solved in the United States, where we're much less enthusiastic about state regulation. We're rugged individualists over there. It's the free market. I don't have much to say about that prong of the misinformation problem. But I agree that it's just people live in different informational worlds, and there's less and less of a shared set of facts that could ground a conversation across party lines.
I have a question here. This is gentleman. Okay, one more, and then this gentleman. Let's take both questions, please. Yes?
Okay. Thanks for the presentation. I'm Rebecca. I'm a student, and I very much agree with the idea that we need this large plethora of methods and modes of participation to serve the purposes of a society that is diverse, and we like to be diverse. Among these, digital activism seems to me to be one of the less costly ones, because people are already on Insta and such platforms, and you don't need to bring them there. So my concern would be, because of how relatively easy it is, could there be a risk that it substitutes other arenas of deliberative democracy instead of integrating them? And I think it's specifically true for my generation. So from the point of view of an activist, is this a concern? Is this something that you feel like you need to counter for?
You're addressing me.
Yes.
Sorry, the acoustics is really bad in this room. So maybe could you state your question one more time? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So using platforms such as Instagram, that is relatively easy to use, that people access in a relatively easy manner, seems to bring the risk that people would only use that platform instead of other arenas of deliberative democracy. Do you think this is an actual concern we should have, especially my generation?
So you're saying that people just focus on like this clicktivism and social media and don't involve in other activities, political activities. It could be, but I would say that getting involved in all different ways of activism and seeing it for the first time, maybe through social media or maybe through influencers who work in certain groups or promote certain ways, that's very powerful. And I think also it's very powerful and important to comment in social media if you see that hatred is being spread, for example, or that you write to your local newspaper and write a reader's piece, because especially right-wing forces do that a lot, and they take in a lot of space with bots and so on and so forth. So I would say start liking and sharing things that you like to see, and start talking back on social media if something is said that is not okay. It's important.
Okay, there's a question. Pardon? Oh, over there, and then this gentleman. Okay. So this gentleman has been waiting here too for quite a while. So we'll just collect the last questions now, please. Yes. So who is now first? Okay.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Please keep it short, yes, and make yourself
short.
very clearly.
I think we all agree now that somebody should do something, everybody should be doing something. My question is, what is enough? Is there something like enough that we are doing individually, or when it comes to connecting collectively?
So I mean, for my money, I think it's a fantastic question, and I think it's something kind of everyone has to wrestle with their own conscience, like how much is enough. But I think the way that it can be individually calibrated and maybe make the burden seem less heavy is if you can find ways from where you already are to just sort of get a little bit more social change juice out of roles you already occupy. So it's not that you need to now I'm going to spend 15 hours a week going out and working with this. And maybe that's something that you do want to do, and that's what you prioritize, not you personally, but the general you. But maybe it's something that, given the job or the hobby that you already have, you can tweak it in a way or present it in a way that is going to, send signals which are likely to get uptake and have influence on other sorts of people. How much is enough? I don't know. A lot of my research started out as very in the weeds cognitive science, and then my conscience started growing and growing, and I designed a class on moral psychology and climate change, and then I wrote a book about it because I felt like I wasn't doing enough, and the problems are pretty bad. Okay. That's not the route everyone's going to take, but it was the idea was, given where I am and the kind of change I can make, how can I do it? And that seemed like the right path to me. Okay. And now I'm done and I don't have to do anything else.
Okay, Cesy, you want to say something?
I would just change the perspective on working in wanting to change something. Is there ever enough to create a good relationship with your spouse, for example? I think not. It goes until you die, but it's something you love doing because you love your spouse. And I think that's a very great way for me to look at it. I'm part of this democracy, and I want to give as I can, when I can, and I form it with what I give into it.
Okay. No. Okay. 1, 2, then 3. Yes. Yeah. Please.
Yeah, I'm from a small town in Illinois and have lived outside the U.S. for most of my life. So I have,
what town? I'm from Illinois also.
Arcola, south of Champaign-Urbana. Yeah, okay.
Family by there.
Okay, anyway, I have a superficial understanding of the dynamics, what's happening in the U.S., because I lived most of my life outside. But it seemed very exciting 5 years ago with the Black Lives Movement that structural change was happening. You had private corporations starting diversity initiatives saying it's good for our bottom line. And now, within a week, that has all been abolished in Orwellian. You can't use the word diversity. And where are the mass protests? From the outside, I saw these mass protests 5 years ago when Black Lives Matter. And I thought, wow, something's changing.
Okay.
So how do you keep structural change from regressing?
Why don't we just collect the last questions here? There are two on the side here, and then there's one more in the back.
Thank you.
Gentleman too.
Thank you. I was born in Iran and live in Ukraine, and I have two questions. First one, what you think if your university or media have a plan, a meeting with big tech? Because right now in big tech, for example, Instagram, Facebook, if you 5 times looking pro-Trump, algorithm showing you almost only pro-Trump. That means not let you another subject see. And second, before start war, I wrote for all newspaper in Austria, especially Vienna. I have a very fresh information, and I want voluntary sharing with you and working volunteer for your newspaper, because war coming after 3 days. I think they not believe that, but they wrote for me, thank you, we have a best professor working for us 20 years. But I check every newspaper, none of them wrote about war in Ukraine. And war happened. I mean, maybe it's good if we can find place in media or social media, activists or local journalists can public.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. My name is Graham Parks. I'm an emeritus professor of philosophy. And I recently stopped writing about climate and the biosphere out of despair. But last week I read something that made me start again and come tonight. That is global polls showing that some 80 to 89% of people actually want their governments to do something about climate change. So the question then to Dan is, a global social movement is possible with that kind of, they just don't realize they're in the majority. They think they're in the minority.
That's huge, right?
Yeah. I mean, to some extent, you said what your book isn't, but to some extent it's how to, because it says how to create social change. So how do we get this global social movement going?
Okay, well, let's take there's another question in the back, and then we'll try to answer it. Yep, please.
Yeah, thank you for the great presentation, Daniel. I'm Hugo. I'm a student at Sciences Po in France. Your subtitle of your book says how anyone can bring about social change. I was wondering, is there maybe a hidden parenthesis there that says anyone in liberal democracies? Have you considered situations in which governments or companies might be working against that social change, and perhaps people are at risk of losing their lives or their livelihoods?
So, when you're not dealing with a liberal, okay. Okay, so we talked questions about Black Lives. Where are the mass demonstrations now? There's questions about big tech, and are we dealing with this global social movement here? I wonder, does it make sense to think about global movements if politics is at least national usually, and also quite often quite local? And so, would you just
I saw that stat too, and I loved it, and it was surprising to me as well that there's a sense in which you may think that's step one. There's so many people who are now aware of the climate crisis and want something to be done about it. That's a win, and we should take the win. And they're now the next question is how do you mobilize that? And the next mini step is making sure everyone else knows that so many people want something to be done about this, right? You take the knowledge and the set of preferences which is out there in the world, and you make it common knowledge, because now it's something that everyone can coordinate on and figure out what the next step is. So a lot of the message of the book is sort of don't be a hater about incrementalism. Keep pushing, keep doing these sort of small steps. We have an entire chapter where I don't have a prescription for you, but here's maybe something which can feed into hope, which is we know tipping points happen, right? You grind and you grind and you grind, and a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, and nothing happens. But at some point, the straw is the one that breaks the camel's back, and then you get a tipping point. You get sort of a phase shift in global opinion about things. I think we can identify when those have happened in the past, and we have no idea when they're coming in the future, but they could just be right around the corner. How to get a little bit closer, I don't have a recommendation, but I think these are the right, progress has been made, that everyone cares. This wasn't even the vocabulary 50, 60 years ago, and now this. Am I supposed to answer all of these?
Why are there no mass demonstrations on the streets of the United States? So would it make a major difference right now? Do any of you, Asya, you any idea, any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that things are changing so rapidly in the US, and Trump is issuing so many orders and doing so many things, and it's hard to even organize to demonstrate because the next second it's something else. And so I think people are a bit in shock right now and trying to figure out what to do. I mean, I bet that there will be demonstrations, but the Black Lives Matter demonstrations, there were very clear events that set those off that were just atrocious events, and people watched those videos and they were moved to demonstrate, and there was kind of a clear thing to demonstrate against. And now there's just so much chaos and so much happening. I think it's a bit disorienting for people, but I suspect that demonstrations will start happening once there's kind of something that people can coalesce around and demonstrate against, and not just these policies that are in flux from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m.
Yeah, there were massive large demonstrations before sometimes last year against the AfD, triggered by one news report that this Austrian far-right activists had held a seminar in Berlin, basically talking about remigration, and somehow this mobilized a lot of people. Did this make a difference? Did it help? Was it something that, yeah?
Yeah, well, there were studies on that. If you see people demonstrating against the right, that things don't become normal so quickly. Like there's the so-called normalcy bias, and if something happens, like for example, this remigration thing, and it is in the media and nobody demonstrates against it, people just fall and think this is normal, and through the demonstrations, definitely they push down the votes.
So just expressing outrage in a very visible way can shape also.
It just makes you, if you see your neighbor is out on the street and says this is not okay, this makes a difference within you and your voting habit as well. Whereas everybody sitting at home and just thinking it's normal, like you saw this a lot in fascist Germany, exactly that, like people just going on to work, pretending nothing had happened. And it's extremely similar like in the US now, because of the way he does it, and it's so confusing. That's the dangerous part, I think, because you can't really fight back in a straight way. It's very well orchestrated in a very scary way.
Maybe as a final question, because we're coming to the end of our allotted time to you, Dan. When we look at the MAGA movement and what they're doing, is this basically also a movement of social change which follows the same dynamics, or is it just basically a resentment-driven backlash against other forces of change? So,
So the short answer is, they're doing social change. They're crushing it from a point of view. I know lefties who wished the lefty administration would get in there and make change as aggressively in the pursuit of their values and policies as this administration is in pursuit of theirs. Is this a playbook that I think the left should borrow? No. I think a lot of it's illegal. I think some of it, hopefully the institutions will stand up and a lot of it will be wheeled back, as it were. But is it just resentment driven? So is it just resentment driven? I don't think that's all of it. I think there's been a lot of long game planning which has enabled the situation in the United States to happen. So for instance, what's happening on the Supreme Court, that's not something that Trump did. That's a playbook which has been enacted over the course of decades, and there have been institutions set up to train judges to move up through the ranks, to be seated on, like there are you know, strategic initiatives in the service of social change which are less reckless than just what's happening with Trump, but which is enabling it to happen.
And since we're all talking about the future, there is a question from our maybe youngest participant here. Please.
Thank you. I'm Felix. So you said that we need people to realize that we want something to be done, but the problem on social media is that all algorithms tend to prioritize posts that make people angry, and as climate change becomes a bigger problem, more people will fight against it, and these posts will make people even angrier, which means that these will dominate social media, giving the illusion that nobody cares anymore.
Okay, you want to say something?
That's extremely accurate. You got it, and that's one of the big problems. Thank you.
And it's a problem probably we're not going to solve tonight.
But maybe
but it's
you will
for you,
solve it.
And all of you. How can we use also social media for positive forces of change, and not allow it to distort our society. Well, thank you so much for this very interesting discussion, and all of you, and also thank you for your interest and for your good questions. And I want to wish you a good evening, and I think there's still a chance to stay here a little bit in the vicinity.
Thank you.